you gonna eat fried worms? How you gonna eat fried worms? Ketchup, mustard, horseradish, cheese. Fry me up another one, if you please. Reading books!
Hello everybody, this is Mr. Matt with the McCracken County Public Library in Paducah, Kentucky. With permission of Scholastic Books, we are back today with our third part of the reading of How to Eat Fried Worms by Thomas Rockwell, featuring illustrations by Emily McCully. The author, Thomas Rockwell, is famous in his own right. This book alone has gone through dozens of printings, sold millions of copies, and even been made into a movie. But Thomas Rockwell also had a very famous father, who was a painter named Norman Rockwell. Now, if his name doesn't ring a bell, I bet you'll recognize some of Norman Rockwell's paintings. Like this one. Or this one. How about this one? Now, as a recap, we just left the gang as Billy ate his fourth worm. But it didn't go easy. Everybody is getting worried. Billy is worried he'll get sick. Tom is worried that Alan and Joe are playing tricks. And Alan and Joe are worried they'll lose the bet. Find out what happens next as we get into chapters 11 through 18 of How to Eat Fried Worms by Thomas Rockwell.
Chapter 11. Tom. Billy pushed the frying pan toward Tom. "Okay, Fink, if it's not supposed to hurt you, you eat a piece." "Oh, no," said Alan. He and Joe were lying on their stomachs in the hayloft watching. "If he eats a piece, you lose, Billy. The bet was you were going to eat 15 worms, not you and him together." Billy didn't look up, his eyes fixed grimly on Tom. "All right, then I'll go dig another worm just for him. He's so big, telling me, hurry up, I can't wait around all day, don't be a sissy." "All right, now." "I didn't say sissy," said Tom uncomfortably. "I just said if the first 4 worms didn't kill you, this one wouldn't. I can't help it if my mother told me to be home by 2 today. She's going shopping, so I have to mind my brother." "Yeah?" said Billy. "Okay, so we'll just have time for you to eat a worm before you go. Come on, where's the shovel?" "Here," said Alan from the loft. "We brung an extra today." A worm dangled squirming from his fingers. He dropped it to Billy. "It's not cooked," said Tom. I'll do it," said Joe, scrambling down the ladder. He took the worm from Billy and ran out, then ran back and grabbed the frying pan. Tom sat down on an overturned pail to wait. He didn't want to eat any worm. It wasn't his bet. He glanced at the door creaking in the wind. Maybe he should make a break for it. Of course, he could see Billy's point. Billy didn't believe Joe's story, but still, he'd find it reassuring if Tom ate some worm too. "He'll eat it," Billy was saying to Alan. "If he don't, he's chicken," said Alan, "after all his talk." "Why don't I eat it?" thought Tom. "I mean, it's a yucky thing to do, but it wouldn't kill me." He scratched his neck, shifting his seat on the pail. "I don't know," thought Tom. "I just won't, I guess." He gagged, imagining what it would be like to bite down on a soft, fat, boiled worm. He glanced at the door again. Billy kicked the door shut. "Leave it open," said Tom. "Why?" "Because I said so." "Yeah, well, you don't own this barn." "Neither do you, your father does." Billy rubbed his nose, watching Tom figuring. He's trying to pick a fight so he won't have to eat the worm. "Okay." Billy opened the door and set a brick against it. Tom shifted his seat on the pail again. He couldn't stop thinking about what it would be like to bite down on a soft, fat, boiled worm. He scratched his ear. Who did Billy think he was, trying to order people around, telling them what they had to eat and all? Billy wasn't anybody's father. Tom began to feel put upon and indignant and stubborn. A screen door slammed. Joe coming back with the worm. Tom licked his lips. He heard Joe running across the barnyard toward them. "Billy!" Alan shouted. Billy spun around just in time to catch a glimpse of Tom pelting out the door banging shut. He flung to the window. Joe sprawled in the middle of the barnyard on his back. Tom was clambering over the wall into the meadow. The frying pan lay upside down beside the horse trough. Chapter 12. The Fifth Worm. "Look," said Billy to himself, staring down at the fried worm on the plate. "Be sensible. How can it hurt me? I've eaten 4 already. Tom was just scared. He's like that. He eggs other people on, but he never wants to do anything himself." "Give up?" asked Alan. "Come on," said Joe. "We haven't all day." 5 more minutes, said Alan. "Then I win." "There's no time limit," said Billy. For the first time he wondered what he'd do if he lost. Where could he ever get $50? But how could he eat 10 more? Big, fat, ugly, soft, brown things. He couldn't ask his father for $50. He heard Alan and Joe whispering together. "He's gonna quit." "Yeah, I knew he'd never make it when I bet with him. He talks big. Him and Tom are just the same. But they never do anything." Billy gritted his teeth, glopped on ketchup, mustard, salt, grated cheese, whatever was on the crate, anything, everything, and then grabbed up the worm and tore it apart with his hands, stuffing it into his mouth, chewing and swallowing, gulping. Then panting, he reached out and wiped his gooey hands on Alan's trousers and grinned messily up at him and said, "There. 5. Chapter 13. Nothing to worry about. That night Alan asked his father to show him $50. After that he couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in his rumpled bed. Suppose he lost? He could just see himself asking his father for $50, begging for it on his knees, tears streaming down his cheeks, and then at Thanksgiving dinner cringing while all his aunts and uncles and cousins roared over his father's story of Alan's bet. He slid out of bed and snuck down the carpeted hall to his parents' bedroom. "You gotta wake him, Miss O'Hara, you got to," he whispered into the phone. "It's an emergency. I got to speak to him." Pause. "I got a hoarse throat, Miss O'Hara. That's why I'm whispering. Please." Pause. "Gee, thanks, Miss O'Hara. No, I won't ever call this late again. It's... He waited, gnawing at his thumbnail. A board creaked on the stairs. He stiffened. Silence. "What do you want?" said Joe suddenly over the phone. "Geez, I was sleeping. You woke me up." "Joe, suppose I lose. My father'll never let me take the money out of my savings account. I know he won't. You think I'll lose, Joe? Huh? Joe, tell me. Give it to me straight, Joe. I gotta know. I can't sleep." Joe sighed. "Look, I told you this afternoon. You got nothing to worry about. He's cracking. Sure, he ate that one today. Sure, he might." Chapter 14. The Pain and the Blood and the Gore. 4 blocks away, Billy suddenly found himself in a brightly lit butcher shop, jostled by a crowd of enormous, pigeon-breasted, middle-aged women, shouting to make himself heard over the din of their chatter and the roars of the butcher ordering about the weasel-faced boys who were lugging haunches and tubs of meat in and out of the refrigerator room in the rear. Then a butcher saw Billy jumping among the women and asked for his order, and Billy gave it, and suddenly he was shoved up close to the chopping block, and the butcher slapped down 10 black worms as big as snakes, and Billy tried to say they were too big, he'd choke on them, but the butcher couldn't hear him over the thumps of his cleaver, and the din of the women, and the hoarse shouts of the other butchers, and before Billy knew what was happening, he was seated at a table in Longchamp's restaurant on Times Square in New York City, with a large napkin tied under his chin, and a waiter was uncovering a platter on which lay one of the huge black worms, coiled snakily, a red rose wobbling in the center of its coils. "How can I ever finish it?" said Billy, and cut into the mammoth coil. Steaming pink juice flooded out. Billy ate and ate and ate and ate, and then looked, and he must have eaten more than that. And then he looked again, and there was no hole at all. He had eaten and eaten and eaten, nothing at all. And then he felt something cold on his ankles, and looked under the tablecloth, and there were 2 more of the huge worms wound around and around his ankles. And then he felt something weighing down his arm, and he looked, And there was another worm wound around his arm, glaring hungrily at him with its bloodshot eyes. And from everywhere in the vast room, winding between the tables, waiters approached, carrying huge silver serving platters. Billy opened his eyes. For the first moment in the moonlight flooding his bedroom, his two bare feet sticking up out of the bottom of the covers looked like two huge white worms' heads. And then he realized that he had been dreaming and sank back onto his pillow, the nightmare melting away. There were no huge worms as big as pythons. He was home in bed. His parents were asleep in the next room. His stomach rumbled. But suppose Joe hadn't been lying. The hair stood up on the back of his neck. Or suppose Joe had made it all up, but had been right anyway, without knowing it. A shutter banged. Billy glanced out the window and saw the moon riding among the tossing leaves. His stomach rumbled and gurgled. He groaned. Suppose he was dying. He'd heard of people waking up in the middle of the night with pains in their stomachs, and then, as the windows turned gray in the dawn, they died. Toadstools, soured lobster, tainted pork. That was a pain! He clutched his stomach, and groaning, half fell, half staggered out of bed and hobbled toward the door, bent double. Maybe there was an antidote, he whimpered. It didn't hurt a lot, but nothing ever did to begin with, did it? Chapter 15, 3:15 a.m. His mother reached out and switched on the light. What kind of pain, Billy? He stood beside the bed, clutching his stomach. In my stomach. Oh, there it goes again, I think. Did you eat something before bed? She was pulling on her bathrobe. John? John? She shook her husband's shoulder. He mumbled sleepily. Did you eat candy or something before bed, Billy? Worms, groaned Billy. Worms? John? John? Billy, what kind of worms? Regular worms? Night crawlers? She felt his forehead, lifted his chin to look in his face. You don't have a temperature. How many worms did you eat? 5. 2 boiled and 3 fried, with ketchup, mustard, horseradish, salt, pepper, butter, to make them taste better. Fried? Ketchup? Taste better? John, wake up! I had this bet with Alan. Oh, he groaned again. Take your hands away. Where does it hurt now? Show me. It doesn't really hurt so much now. It's just rumbling and gurgling, something awful. Then why are you groaning? Asked his father, sitting up. Because I'm afraid it's going to start hurting. Do you think I'm going to die, Daddy? Worms? His father asked. Ordinary worms? Earthworms? Billy nodded. And how many did you eat this evening? 1 this afternoon. I've eaten 1 every day for the last 5 days, but they weren't little ones. They were night crawlers, huge ones, as big as snakes almost. His father lay back down, pulling the covers up around his shoulders. Don't worry, eating 1 night crawler a day for 6 weeks wouldn't hurt you. Go back to bed. It's probably all the ketchup and mustard that's upsetting your stomach. Drink a glass of warm water. John, are you sure? Said Billy's mother. It doesn't seem to me that worms could be a very healthy thing to eat. John? His father snuggled deeper under the covers. I didn't say eating worms would turn him into an all-American fullback. I just said they wouldn't hurt him. Now let's go to sleep. Billy's mother glanced at Billy, shivering beside the bed in bare feet and pajamas, and then shook her husband again. John, wake up. I think you should call Dr. McGrath. You don't really know whether or not eating worms is harmful. I know you don't. Billy's father groaned and sat up. Now look. I'm not going to call Dr. McGrath at 3:30 in the morning to ask if it's all right for my son to eat worms. That's flat. Secondly, I do know that Billy's not going to die before morning. If worms were poisonous, which they're not, he would have been laid up before this. Billy, you've been eating worms for 5 days? Billy nodded. All right. And thirdly, I ate a live crayfish when I was in college and have suffered no discernible ill effects. And fourthly, I am going to sleep. Billy's mother slipped her feet into her slippers, stood up and buttoned her bathrobe, and then leaned over the bed and shook her husband's shoulder. John, John, I won't be able to sleep until you call. John, what about tapeworms or a fungus? John, wake up. Billy, you go back to bed. Your father will call Dr. McGrath. John? Billy lay in bed listening to his mother and father arguing in their bedroom. He could only make out a word here and there, usually when his father started to shout, only to be shushed immediately by his mother. Billy got sleepier and sleepier. His stomach had stopped rumbling and gurgling. It was warm and cozy under the covers after standing on the cold floor in his bare feet. Then, in the midst of a foggy drowse, he heard someone dialing the phone in the hall outside his parents' bedroom, and then his father say, "Poison control?" and explain the case. Then there was a silence. Billy heard the water running in the bathroom, and then his father said, "You're sure? These weren't little ones. These were night crawlers." Pause. "And no long-range ill effects?" Pause. His father laughed. "A bet, I think." And the next thing Billy knew, sunlight was streaming through his window, and Emily was skipping down the hall past his door singing, "Half a pound of 2-penny rice, half a pound of treacle, that's the way the money goes." His father shouted down the stairs, "Helen, do you know where my green tie with the red stripes is?" Chapter 16. The Sixth Worm. Billy gulped it triumphantly, serene, untroubled. By the door, Alan glowered, his mind racing. "He's gonna do it! He'll win! What'll I do? $50! Joe sat on an overturned pail, whistling, gazing carelessly about, sneaking a glance now and then at Billy. What had gone wrong? Why hadn't he cracked? And outside, Tom lurked sheepishly in the bushes behind the stone wall, peering at the barn. Chapter 17. The Seventh Worm. Billy ate it offhand, sideways, reading a comic book. Alan and Joe squatted glumly in the barn door watching him. As Billy was daubing horseradish sauce on the last bite, Tom's head appeared in a corner of the grimy window. He waved tentatively at Billy. Ignoring him, Billy gulped down the last bite, wiped his mouth, and tucking his comic book under his arm, strolled airily out of the barn, remarking over his shoulder, "See you tomorrow, fellas!" Chapter 18. The Eighth Worm. "Where's Joe?" asked Billy, spreading mustard down the length of the fried worm. "He wouldn't come," said Alan sullenly. "It's no fair putting on that much mustard." "Ha!" said Billy. "Who says I can put on as much as I like of whatever I like, and you know it? Why wouldn't he come?" "How should I know?" Billy swooshed a bit of worm around in ketchup and horseradish sauce. "I know why he didn't." "Yeah? You're so smart? Big deal." Alan couldn't get the $50 out of his head. What was his father going to say when he told him he'd bet $50 and lost? Geez! He gnawed at his thumbnail. "He wouldn't come because he knows I've won. He knows I could eat 20 worms if I had to." Yeah, well, you ain't won yet. There's still 7 to go. You act so big, wait till you begin to feel it in your stomach. You think you know everything? Yeah, you'll see, you wait. "Ha!" said Billy. "You think you can scare me talking like that? Phooey!" He strolled past Alan out into the sunlight. "Hi," said Tom, popping up from behind a barrel. "Pfft," said Billy disdainfully, and walked on,